remember, the reason you're in this room is because you want to take the randomness out of your communication, you want to exert more control over your own life, and ultimately the lives of others. When people come to you, they want the same thing, although they can't express it that way. Your job is compliance. Your job is not for them to believe in you, although if you tell them, if you have compliance, belief is kind of easy. Because if you tell them to believe something, they will. Right? Compliance is the fundamental rule. Nothing you want to accomplish happens until somebody does what you tell them. That's the ugly and pristine truth of it. No change happens until people follow your instructions. Right? So the secret is to get them to want to follow your instructions instead of trying to force them to follow your instructions. And that again comes back to giving people their autonomy back, their sense of self-direction. Okay? Which is why direct commands, the way most people understand them, rarely work well. If you have enough authority, the nervous system will capitulate, albeit grudgingly. But the nervous system will find a way to get payback. Okay? In Killer Influence, we'll be talking about the four pillars of maximum hypnotic influence: authority, attractivity, acquiescence, and affinity. And if you understand these four macro elements and all the different ways to work within them, then pretty much everyone you meet, anytime, anywhere, will pretty much do what you say. Right? But it's not just important to understand the techniques of it, it's important to understand the ramifications of it and the dynamics of it. The king of all macro-hypnotic operators is authority. As referenced by the Milgram experiments in the 50s, I believe it was, or maybe actually it was earlier than that, early part of the last century. So a man by the name of Stanley Milgram decided to test just how far people would go under the orders of authority. Anybody familiar with those experiments?
Oh yeah, that's the shocking experiment.
Mm-hmm. Okay, for those of you who don't or aren't familiar with them, Milgram staged a very powerful experiment where he hired actors to pretend to be test subjects. And there was a sham experiment designed to test the people that thought they were doing the testing. And so what would happen is they would bring these college students in and they were asked to participate in an experiment that was supposed to be to test the effects of negative reinforcement on learning. And so they were taught or told by a man with a white lab coat and a clipboard that there was this bank of switches, and each one had a little marking on it, everything from very, very small voltage all the way up to like fry your toes and turn you into barbecue level, lethal basically. And they were taught that there was a glass window, and on the other side of the window was a man strapped in a chair, what looked a lot like an electric chair. Okay? And they were told to ask the man in the chair questions. And every time the man got the answer right, everything was fine. Every time the man got the answer wrong, you were to flip one of those switches. And each one was progressively higher and higher voltage. And so the student thought that he was there to test the effects of negative reinforcement on a person's ability to learn, when in reality what was being tested was the student's willingness to administer progressively higher and higher levels of shock because somebody told them to. And it turns out that the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of students would continue to administer shocks all the way up to lethal. Now, the man in the chair was not actually being shocked. He was an actor. He was paid to pretend to get progressively worse until he was finally like screaming and writhing in agony as this guy's on this. And the guys in the chair and the women in the chairs are just breaking out in sweats. They're crying. They're begging to stop. And the man on the clipboard says, "Please continue." Right? Because somebody in authority told them to. In spite of the psychological trauma, in spite of the moral upbringings of these people, somebody in authority told them to do it, so they did. Now, what's the upshot? When you appropriate the trappings of authority, when you assume authority in anyone's world, their nervous system will comply much more readily than when you're an equal. They become hyper-suggestible. They become hyper-obedient. They may not like you. They may not want to do it, but they will. The corollary to that is they'll find a way to get payback, right? When you assume an authoritative position in the workplace, people will get the work done because you're the authority that told them to do it. But you'll be amazed at the passive-aggressive behaviors that become generated. Efficiency drops. People start cutting corners, anything they can to piss you off, all right? That's the dynamic of authority-based compliance. It trumps everything, right? People obey because they either fear retribution or the consequences, or they're courting favor. But they don't necessarily do it because they want to. Does that make sense? Contrast that with an attractivity-based set of compliance, where it's mostly the desire for approval, the desire to please. Okay? You have a different set of dynamics when somebody is doing something out of an attractivity motivation, right? You see this most often in prom queen syndrome, right? Where these guys who have little to no social skills, little to no social awareness will take any kind of abuse just to be in the presence of the prom queen. You know, to carry her books home from school, kind of a thing. Right? I'm dating myself, I think, with that one, but because nobody carries books anymore, they're all iPads, right? But my point is that when people are working from an attractivity standpoint, there's a desire to please the other person, to get approval. It's a desire for validation. It's not necessarily a desire for punishment. It could be a fear of ostracization, but that's more of an affinity or acquiescence, an affinity ploy. Ostracization, it goes more towards affinity, being excommunicated from the group, as opposed to one person. Does that make sense? Now, they're not mutually exclusive. In fact, when you can stack them, which is what I teach, you balance authority with attractivity, with affinity. People will just comply. They'll want to, their nervous system will be predisposed to, and they'll feel like they're doing the right thing by doing it. Okay? But again, those are things that we'll talk more about in Killer Influence, which is an expansion. It's again, you're learning the tools, you're getting the paints and the brushes today, right? Killer Influence is a little bit more about strategy, tactics, thinking in terms of environment, identity, intelligence, and then ultimately influence, right? That being said, did we have a good lunch? Is everybody here?
No.
Oh, the damn Canadians!
I'm telling you, the sunlight. It's killing them.
Toronto time. All right. We have. Oh hell no. Oh hell no. I just got back from Montreal last week. It was fucking freezing up there.
Did it thaw out yet?
My water hasn't thawed out yet, so it was. I think the warmest it was up there was 50.
50's all right.
That was the warmest it was when I was up there.
Wear a t-shirt at 50. 50, I could wear a t-shirt under 50. I'll wear a shirt like this at 50. But
No,
if I'm moving around.
I was wearing my Alaskan parka, my sealskins, my mucklucks.
Well, you grew up in a cold place, didn't you?
I agree. Yeah, it's called marriage. No, but this. Sorry. Sorry, I had a moment there. It's gone now. No, I grew up in Pennsylvania, and it reminded me an awful lot of Pennsylvania being up there. And Pennsylvania is a great state to be from.
That's what I say about Buffalo.
Yeah. I got back to San Diego. I'm in paradise. Thank you. Whereas any other time before I went to Montreal on a regular basis, it's like 55. Fuck, it's cold. Man, it's miserable out here. No, you don't know miserable till you've been in Montreal. And Montreal's a beautiful city. Don't get me wrong. We had a ball up there, but I couldn't handle the weather. There's a reason why over half the city's underground, which is kind of cool, actually.
Half of it spent 6 months in
Yeah. But so what did we learn from the modules this morning? What did we discover? What did we learn, Elmer?
Well, I got a chance to do the criteria.
Mm-hmm.
I've done a little bit before, but this made it even more solid.
Good.
I had more of an outcome this time.
Good.
And of course, I ended up buying stuff too.
Virtually speaking.
Yeah, virtually speaking. And I've done over all that kind of stuff too, but it made it a little bit more solid in terms of strategy.
Yeah. Again, until you can get these tools in your utility belt to the point where you know the parameters of them, it's very hard to think in terms of strategies because you're still trying to get the mechanics of the techniques, right? After a while, you won't have to worry about what to use because it's already handled for you. It's on your diagram. If all you do is put a little number next to each one, you know exactly the order and step sequence to take. Right? If you want to shorten it, you just go 1, 2, 3, and just keep talking. And you'll have 80 to 90% of whatever you'll need in any situation. Because once you know what's important to another human being, they'll talk all day long. All you have to do is ask a few questions, give them a little nudge here and there. They'll talk themselves pretty much into whatever you want them to do. That's the magic behind 3 magic questions, is the longer they talk, the better you look. Okay? So to summarize the 3 elements that we've covered, state control, rapport, and we'll spend a lot more time on other rapport stuff, rapport skills. And then 3, the big one, was criterion values, right? And then we did a little sidebar on process, which made everybody's eyes cross, right? And the process aspect, the VAK process aspect, is by far, from what I've seen in terms of cross-contextual NLP people and stuff like that, the most challenging part of learning these things, because it's where sensory acuity, calibration skills, and linguistic expression meet, right? And so it's very easy to get overwhelmed, especially because there's a limitation to the auditory modality. What do I mean by that? When people listen, we listen sequentially. But when the human body expresses itself, it expresses it holographically. Visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, as well as linguistically, all the subtleties within the language. And so when you try to compress all that information when teaching it, you try to compress it into dialogue. You can't process it all. You go into overwhelm. So that's why we do this. Because your visual system is not linear. Your visual system takes up more bandwidth than any other modality in the brain. Okay? It's the only part of your eyes are the only part of your brain that moves. Did you guys know that? Your optic nerves are a direct outgrowth of brain tissue. They are literally, think of a snail with the little eyes. That would be your brain and your eyes. That's literally how it works. When come here, Elmer. Just stand up for a second. Stand over here. And just put your hands out and slowly push at me. Just come at me. No.
What?
See what his hands did?
Oh, yeah.
See what his hands did? Because as the eyes come in, the eyes follow the first thing that moves. Right? And when the eyes move, the brain moves. When the brain moves, the body moves.
Whoa.
Okay? So what's cool about that is, and interestingly, if he comes at me and I do this, it's easier for him to track and come back to his point of origin. Right? See how his eyes, he came right back? But if as he comes in I do this, see how he kept looking? He couldn't look away. Right? So linearly, this is what a stage magician will do, or what a pickpocket will do. When they're having you focus your attention, they'll look this way because they know you can't actually look at anything else. He can't come. When I move in a horizontal, he can't come back to his point of origin. But if I move straight, he can look back easily. Right? These are not the droids you're looking for. Right? So, in a martial context, when someone looks at you and they go to punch at you, their eyes fixate on a point on your body or your mind. If he goes to push me, see how his hand follows? If I replace the target, right, I'll intersect the line of his intention. He gets stuck here, and his body follows the energy. Right?
Does it help if I'm thinking about it? I mean, if I know you're going to do that, and then
well, if you know you're going to do it, then I can add more. It actually makes the effect less because they're already screening for it, right? So if you go to push, and he just stops, right? Or as he comes in, and everything stops. That's a pattern interrupt, right? You just have to be able to know at what point to deliver the message. Does that make sense? Thank you, Ellen. Give a big round of applause. And the Chinese call that mind hitting, by the way. It's not new.
Call what?
Mind hitting.
Mind? Oh, okay.
Yes?
When you're doing it, are you also trying to cross hemispheres?
I'm not trying to.
Okay.
No, I'm not trying to. It may be incidental in the movement. But the guy I referenced earlier, Apollo Robbins, that's something I learned from him, actually, as to why this shit works. A curved line is harder to come back to your point of origin than a straight line. So when you're directing people, like when you're doing the handshake interrupt, let me use you, Christine. So like when you're doing like the handshake interrupt, it's easier it's force them, see, it's harder for her to look away from this than it is to look away from that. Right? So if I want to make sure I've entrained the vision, I'll use a curved line across her field. Come back. Right? So it's cool stuff, right? But how do you make that useful, right? Certain contexts it's useful, other ones it's not, right? Now maybe if I'm getting somebody to sign a contract, I might go, as we sign this contract, I might come across that way. Because they'll track it easier. Especially if you don't want them to look back at your eyes, right? Look here, right? That's harder for them to come back than if I go just a straight line, right? And there's always a tendency to kind of whip it back anyway. So make sure everything lines up. Right? Just, what's that?
It's the end, you'll sign, right?
So, when in doubt, this would be the crash course in CPI. Control your state, get rapport, target their criteria and values, just keep talking. Right? Use their words, and life is good, right? But we're going to get even more in depth, okay? We're entering that part now. In the actual CPI diagram, we're going to talk about language. This is where interesting things start to happen, right? Language. Language comes in two varieties in the world according to David. You have modal speaking, or modal languaging as I call it. That's module 3.1 in your manual. It's sensory-based language. The more modalities you can incorporate when you describe things, the more absorption you create at a neurological level. Okay? We tend to have one modality that leads into the other modalities, and then we tend to have a particular modality, which may be the same one or a different one, that we prefer over the others. Right? So when people relate, they may relate primarily in visual words. They may relate to us primarily in kinesthetic words. That I don't get it. I don't get what what you're giving me, right? Auditory. I can't tune into what you're saying. That rings a bell to me. These are all auditory descriptors. Therefore, you know they're accessing the auditory parts of their brain. That's literally what they're telling you. I'm using the auditory cortex of my brain to relate to you right now. Does it mean they're not using the others? No. It just means there's a dominance and a preference. Does that make sense? Someone might say, I see what you're saying. Right? When I see what you're saying, what are they telling me? I'm making a picture. Right? So keep in mind that the minute you hear little catchphrases like that, the first thing you should be thinking, auditory lead, visual lead, kinesthetic lead, whatever. If you relate to a person in their primary lead system, they'll like you better. They'll understand you better, right? Now, the problem happens, of course, is if Fred is an auditory and I'm a kinesthetic, he's going to talk to me about what sounds right to him, and I'm saying, I don't get it. You know, what do you mean? Don't you see or hear what I'm saying? And all of a sudden, we're arguing about the same thing, and we're not, because there's a translation issue, right? He has to work harder to translate my feeling words into his auditory language. How many people here speak a second language? Right? When you have to translate from your dominant language to a secondary language, is there a little bit of effort that goes on there? Guess what? When you have to translate from primarily visual to an auditory, this same effort goes into place. The difference is it's outside of conscious awareness for the most part, unless you're really, really fluent. In which case, my wife speaks amazing English, and you can see the energy when she has to talk in English, right? Her native language is Mandarin, right? And as good as she is in English, you can see she gets tired. When she goes to speak Chinese, it's like somebody opened up the floodgates to Energyville because it's effortless. So even though we may be fluent in a language, it still takes extra processing power to translate. Okay? The same process maybe a slightly different level of intensity is happening when we have to translate from the visual to the auditory, from the auditory to the kinesthetic, if that's our native or primary system. Conversely, though, you can enrich somebody's experience of what you're describing by adding these things in. Adding, starting if you know somebody's a visual dominant person, you can start with a visual and then saying that, and sometimes as you're seeing that picture, you can hear the sounds going bigger and brighter and stronger, and that feeling can well up inside of you of feeling really connected to what you're seeing, right? And you may even begin to imagine what that might smell like or what it might taste like. And you can describe in the different modalities, and it enhances the absorption that you create. And remember, what are the two mediators of trance? Absorption and focus, right? So in NLP speak, we would call that overlap, or some people would call it pyramiding, but it's basically going in on one modality and just expanding the sensory experience to incorporate all bandwidths. The reason why spinning works is because it does exactly that. It takes every part of your brain, every part of your body, activates it and targets it to a very specific level. When we do modal speaking, we're doing the same thing, just using our language. Okay? So, the first exercise is going to be very, very simple. Well, at least I hope it's simple.
Simple for you.
Yeah. And again, it's not going to be an elicitation exercise. Not at all. Because at this level of communication, all we care about is facilitating absorption. So it doesn't really matter what your primary lead system is or what your preferred lead system is. We're going to nail you on all of them. Right? The whole point about exercise in Module 3.1 is learning how to speak in such a way that you engage the full spectrum of sensory experience. It's going to make any story you tell much more vibrant, much more compelling, much more theatrical, for all the right reasons. It's going to reach the greatest number of people, right? And that's what we want at the global level of influence, right? Where's mine?
Oh, right here. I have
You took it! Remember, we're going global first. So, modal speaking lets us impact everyone, right? And the nice thing is because of a person's own unique sorting system, as they hear the word in the modality that matches their dominant or primary, they'll just focus on that. You'll get everyone. Make sense? Okay, so here's what you're going to do. You may or may not want to, in this point we're just going to begin talking in these different representational systems. Do I have words in here? I don't have words! Okay, so let's do this. We'll make you generate them. Ha ha! I think in the first CPI manual I actually had a list for each of the modalities. So, Elmer, give me a visual word. See. Senor. Fred, give me a visual word. Look, okay. Give me a visual word. Notice? No.
That's probably why I didn't like that.
Picture?
Okay.
Image?
Clearly.
Visualize?
Your future's bright, you know. Bright.
Bright? That's very visual, isn't it? Right? Luis, how about, can you think of one? No, these are actually pretty good, right? So as you see the big picture and you begin to look deeply into the future, you can begin to picture and imagine perhaps what this might look like clearly as you begin to focus even more intently on the picture I'm creating for you. Can you see it? No. What did I just do? I used all visual words. I spoke primarily in one modality, right? And for those of you who were very visual, you went, holy shit. For those of you who weren't quite so visual, you went, right? That's the drill, all right? This is what we call a word salad exercise, where we have a string of words, and we have to find the way to put them together in a way that almost kind of sort of makes sense. The first few times, whenever you do a word salad drill, you are speaking those words for the simple benefit of speaking them. An interesting process begins to happen. The more times you run through the list, the faster your brain begins to process and begins to link those words together until the stuff you're saying actually starts to make a little bit of sense. Then it starts to make more and more sense, and all of a sudden new circuits open up in your brain, and all of a sudden you become eloquent. The speech still tends to have a little bit of a meandering quality to it, but it makes sense because your brain speeds up, your linguistic centers expand, and is able to do that much more effectively. This actually happens a lot to musicians. If you think about how close together the notes in a musical score are, these guys are actually thinking about about all kinds of stuff between each note. They're making shit up between the notes, or thinking about what they have to change or how they have to adapt in fractions of a second, fractions of a second, because the sense of time and the way we perceive it and process it is not static. The brain can modify its speed as necessary, but it only tends to do that when it's placed in the situation that it needs to happen. And until you become very, very adept at understanding how your nervous system works, you don't know how to access the submodalities that let you trigger those states. So we trick you a little bit by putting you in a situation where your nervous system has to adapt. Will you ever have to actually do this exercise to this degree in the real world? Probably not, unless you're working with somebody who's autistic, or somebody who has maybe some Asperger's going on, or somebody who has a learning disability. One of the biggest stories I have with regard to that, back when I first started teaching martial arts, I had a school in Coral Springs, Florida, and I had a good friend of mine had moved from Florida to Nebraska and had started teaching my martial art. And he'd had a student who was diagnosed as learning disabled. And this kid had been coming for 2 years, and in the martial arts that I teach, we have this thing called kata, or forms, which are prearranged movements designed to teach you various things. And the kid had been working on the first kata, the first form, which of like 20 that we teach, for 2 years. He could not learn this form. So I went out there to do a seminar, and my student Alan asked me to work with him. And I watched Alan working with the student, and I watched the student. And what jumped out at me right away was, hey, first thing you gotta understand, my friend Alan was a fighter pilot, or he was when he was in the Air Force. And they have to be they're highly visual, but they're also auditory and digital. And they're usually very balanced in their modalities because they have to see, hear, and feel at hyper speed. So they become very, very multimodal. And that comes out when you speak. This kid was almost 99%, 100% kinesthetic. He could not relate to the world in visuals that well. He could not relate to the world in auditories practically at all. So as I was watching, I looked at the kid. I said, turn around. I stood behind him. Come here, Bob. He'll get a kick out of this. I said, turn around, close your eyes. And I literally, for the next 20 minutes, went like this. Step, down, step, punch. Step back, turn around, step, punch. In less than 90 minutes, he learned 3 forms.
I think I got it.
Did you know that before?
Italian for 1 year, every day, 2 hours, drilling.
Right? 90 minutes. When you find the right modality, they get it. Right? Once you know where they're at, it's easier to take them somewhere else. But if you don't know where they're at, they won't follow. Remember, the confused mind says no. Right? We like people who are like us. If you want to lead people into a new place, you got to meet them where they're at. That doesn't change. Okay? So this is a very, very useful exercise because it's developmental for you. You're going to notice something else. Because of the emotional refractory period, because of the way it works, you're going to notice that after doing these drills, you're going to be much more aware when other people are using modal languages. It's going to jump out at you more because you've been sensitized to it. Now, whether you keep that sensitivity or not is up to you. The more you drill, the better the skill, right? So, we have visual words. Give me some auditories. Who's got some auditory words for me? Here, okay? Sounds? Buzz? Abir, give me a sound word. Humming. Can you tune into something? Rings a bell? And you can use little phrases like that as long as they imply an auditory experience. Anything that implies an auditory experience, it falls into this category and you can use it, right?
What about resonance?
Resonant, yep.
Kinesthetic? No?
Resonant has a vibrational frequency, so it can go kinesthetic if you think of it in terms of feeling. But most people, when they think of resonance, they think more in terms of sound. Right?
Crackle.
Crackle? Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't resonate with me.
Mm-hmm.
Singing?
Huh?
Is singing one?
Singing could be, sure.
Like the word listen.
Listen? Absolutely.
Sound.
I think we did sounds. Oh, no, we don't. Sounds.
Crank up the volume, that's kinesthetic.
Volume is good. See, they start to flow now, right?
Cranking would be kinesthetic.
Cranking would be kinesthetic, yeah. Right? So as we turn up the volume and you begin to hear the sounds and the words around you, you can begin to listen more closely as your brain begins humming to the tune of a new experience that rings a bell for you in a way that makes you understand it. As you understand those feelings, you can begin to resonate with the idea of learning how to tune in to using auditory words. It's kind of like that. It kind of sounds like that.
Kind of sounds like that.
Get it? Huh?
You just drumming it in.
Just drum it in. Mr. Kinesthetic in the back. You're just drumming in the sounds, aren't you?
What's the same thing is how Bandler says how the psychologist and everybody missed all this stuff.
They missed it all. Mostly because their back was to the client most of the time, right? Because the client sits on the couch, you sit in a chair like this, taking notes, asking them about their shit over and over again, and wondering why they don't get better. Kinesthetic. John, give me a kinesthetic word. Slippery. Oh, you've been to the priming class. Okay.
Grab me the wrong way.
Grab you the wrong... You like getting grabbed.
It's a form of affection, I suppose.
Or infection, depending on how you... Never mind. Debbie, give me a kinesthetic word.
Heavy?
Heavy?
My son's kinesthetic, and I told him to grab a burger. Why don't you just grab a burger? And it really stuck with him for like 3 days.
Grabbed a burger and it stuck with him for like 3 days.
Stuck.
Stuck, right?
Feel?
Feel? Absolutely. Right? Give me a feeling word. As he sits there chewing. Motherfucker caught me in the middle of a chew.
Think of stuff you can put your hands on.
What about breeze?
Think of something
Breeze?
you feel it.
Like you can feel the breeze.
Now you can feel the breeze, but breeze isn't a kinesthetic word. It's a description.
When you get a sense of something, is that it?
I'm sorry?
Get a sense of
A
something.
sense? A sense would be multimodal. It's what we would fall into what we call the unspecified. Because can you sense can you sense a picture or a color? Can you sense a sound? Can you sense a feeling? That would be what we call unspecified, which is will throw you into trance in and of itself. Because it takes your focus and goes. You have
Tickle?
Huh?
Tickle?
Tickle? Yes.
You know, a lot of
Run, jump.
A lot of people use other people's words, like and over a period of time, you'll hear a certain
Rohit hasn't given me a word yet. He thought I forgot.
dialect.
Jumping? Oh, grumpy? Absolutely. Can you feel grumpy? Grumpy is more of an adjective, so it's a feeling, but grumpy could be.
You could dial it in.
Dial that in. Happy. Okay. So a beer is grumpy and Rohit is happy. Touch? Yes. So as we touch upon all the ways that this could grab you the wrong way, you can just discover that the heavy feeling can lead you to being stuck, or as you run with this and jump through all these hoops that we're making you jump through, you might tickle your fancy and you can become very, very happy or just plain grumpy.
I see what you're saying.
You can see that. I'll feel you. Right? One of the interesting things that you'll notice many times is that when people are in agreement with you, they'll use one modality, and when they want you to think they agree with you, they'll use a different one. I have a good friend of mine, Richard Clark. When he agrees with you, he gets it. He said, I feel what you're saying, I get it. When he wants you to think he agrees with you, he goes, I hear you. And you're like, yes! No. And he doesn't even realize he does it. I've told him this, he doesn't realize he does it. Right. Olfactory.
Smell.
That smells, right?
Smell.
Stinks. Bouquet? Nah, not really, not so much. Oh wait, bouquet in the terms of like smelling the wine? Or, okay, aroma maybe? Pungent? Huh? Skunky! Yeah, baby. You notice something about these particular words? They're not exactly pleasant, are they? Yes. Huh? Did you say fragrance? Yeah, fragrance.
Grandma's fresh baked bread.
Are there any words or phrases that are very scent-based? Smells like victory, right? Huh?
Smells like Teen Spirit.
Smells like Teen Spirit, right?
Honey?
Honey?
I can't smell honey.
But you get the idea, right? Can you sniff out the truth in what I'm saying? Can you catch the scent of where we're trying to go with this? Right? When you hear these little phrases, trying to catch a scent, sniff it out, they're telling you which part of the cortex are they using. You understand?
They're kinesthetic.
Huh?
If they're kinesthetic, they're trying to get their head wrapped around it.
Maybe you are. Don't
hear
ever
that a
assume
lot.
that because you're doing it that way that they do.
No, I hear the phrase a lot.
You hear that phrase a lot?
People say, well, I can't wrap my head around it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that doesn't make sense to me.
Makes perfect sense to me. Makes perfect sense to me. Because you wrap your head around it, it makes perfect sense. If you can't wrap your head around it, it won't make sense. So you're fucked.
There's a lot of emotion that goes into olfactory.
Yes.
I mean,
Your olfactory sense is one of the most primal of the five senses.
That's why they'll put a little vanilla in the oven, make it smell like chocolate chip cookies when you're walking out the house when they're trying to, they want it to smell like home.
Your nasal sense goes right to your limbic system, right to your reptile brain. There's a reason why it's right above your mouth. Okay? Because that's where you eat. And the fastest sense that you have, aside from your in terms of bodily response, is your smell.
Didn't you tell us to add that into when we're putting someone in a trance? Something about that because it's so powerful.
Yeah, Pillars of Power does it.
Okay, that's okay.
Pillars of Power, when you're breathing in
Yeah.
the scent of victory or the scent of playfulness or whatever, there's a reason for that. The moment we imagine things coming in on those modalities, the cortexes activate and all the responses, as if it were actually physically here, tangible, activate. At that level of the nervous system, there is no distinction between exterior and interior. That comes later on at the different levels of the nervous system as we get closer and closer to the neocortex. Everything human beings experience is filtered, censored, deleted, distorted, generalized. You do not know what true reality is. You are divorced from it. At least the part of you that thinks is divorced from it. The part of you that lives isn't. But nothing we as human beings do is in real time. Think about that for a moment. As fast as information comes in, there is still a lag between when it comes in and when we become aware of it. Nothing we do is in real time, and yet we function perfectly. Right? Just an idea. Gustatory. Sweet? By the way, sweet. Can you smell something sweet?
Yes.
Can you feel something sweet? A little tougher, right? She was sweet to me. Right? But we'll go with sweet. Sweet works. leaves a bad taste in my mouth.
Yummy.
You can mix them too, like sweet smell of success.
Sweet smell of success. There you go. But that's more of a synesthesia, right? So let's be a but sweet smell is fine. That would be more over here though.
Bitter?
Huh?
Bitter?
Pitcher?
Bitter.
Oh, bitter. Yeah, bitter. These are adjectives, but you get the idea,
Well,
right?
so you, at least a bitter taste in my mouth.
Bitter taste in my mouth, the taste of victory, you know. Savor, right? Makes my mouth water.
Yes.
Tasty?
Tasty. Huh? Digest. Yeah, I guess we could go with that.
Or kinesthetic.
That would be more. I have more of a kinesthetic base for me, you know. And again, depending on some of these, my personal belief is that the olfactory and the gustatory are branches of the kinesthetic system. That's my belief. I have no way to prove that one way or the other. But I notice that those three tend to have a much stronger impact on the body and then ultimately to the mind, whereas the visuals and the auditories tend to be a little bit more cerebral, tend to be a little bit more in the head. Does that make sense? Just my observation. Crunchy. Bob. Okay.
Every time you make me laugh, I just start clearing out my lungs.
All right, so the drill is very, very simple. All you're going to do is you're going to, one modality at a time, you're going to break up into, how many people we have in the room? About 15 or 14? 14? Excellent. So we can do it either in 2 groups of 7, or we can do 2 groups of 5 and 1 group of 4. And what we're going to do is we're going to play Pass the Rollo. So you're going to sit in your groups. One person is just going to start talking. And they're going to go through their little word salad list, and when they've reached their saturation point, they're going to throw the Rollo to somebody, and it's his turn to just start riffing. He's going to riff for a couple of minutes in a particular modality, throw the Rollo to someone else, and they get to pick up the thread where they left off in the same modality till everybody's gone around in one modality. Then you come back and do a different modality.
That's a heavy load.
Heavy load, right? Till everybody's done each of the 5 modalities. Then at the last set of drills, all you're going to do is he's going to pass the Rollo. Not well, apparently. Pass the Rollo. I might start visual. Then when I pass the Rollo, she gets to do auditory. Then she passes the Rollo. He gets to do kinesthetic.
I get to eat it.
Right? And then he passes the Rollo, and then we're back to the beginning, right? And we just keep passing it until everybody's done all 5. But you pick up in the new modality from where the other person left off in the previous one. Does that make sense? So that's 2 sets of drills, and you can work as fast or as slow as you want, right? The first couple of times you do word salad, it's going to be like juggling cats, right? It's like, oh, you're going to be going off on tangents. You're going to go, and then a 3rd or 4th pass, though, if you stay with it, you're going to find out all of a sudden your brain is starting to put things into a structure that actually makes kind of sort of sense, right? It's just how your system does really adapt very, very quickly this way if you play with it, right? It's fun stuff, it's good stuff, and you're going to find your overall sensory experience becoming much richer, okay? Plus you'll become more sensitized when other people lapse into certain words. Can we do this? 20 minutes. Go.